Hey, in the background of this season, there are all kinds of subtle reminders that one of the major purposes of this season is worship. We see them all over. Driving through neighborhoods, on the way to my house, there's a nativity scene, a crèche that's there in someone's front yard, and at this nativity scene, there's shepherds and wise men bowing around this manger. And I think globally, but especially here in North America, whether we are connected to a church or not, we have a subtle understanding that this is about some form of worship. The reminders are everywhere. In the number one watched movie in December last year, we of course don't know what the number one watched movie is this year, but the number one watched movie in December of last year, does anyone know what it is? That wasn't here in first service? Home Alone. That's the number one Christmas movie now. When I heard that the other day, I went and actually double fact checked it. It actually is the number one movie, not Miracle on 34th Street or It's a Wonderful Life or one of my personal favorites, White Christmas, Sisters. Home Alone. But even in Home Alone, there's these subtle reminders that this season is about worship. There's a scene where the main character, Kevin, who's played by Macaulay Culkin, is wandering through town alone, sad, looking in the windows of people enjoying their family at Christmas time. John Williams' song, Somewhere in My Memory, is playing as he's wandering the street. And then as that song ends, the camera is drawn back and you can barely see Kevin. He's barely visible in the shadow and in the magnificence of this giant Gothic church. And then as the camera pans in, there is Kevin looking at a nativity scene. And now a different song has started to come into our ears, infiltrate our ears. It's muffled at first, but Kevin walks past the crèche and goes into the church. And as Kevin enters in the church, suddenly with full clarity and robust sound, the choir is singing, "Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angel voices, for Christ is come." And it's a song about worship. "Oh, Holy Night" is being sung. And there's this reminder in this very irreverent movie about worship. Kevin sits down and he begins to have this conversation with this old man who approaches him. It's actually a very deep conversation in a somewhat undeep movie. And the entire conversation happens while a choir is singing a song about worshiping Jesus. Even two lines in the dialogue remind us of the importance of the gathering and the blessing of worship at this time of year. The old man tells Kevin that if someone is feeling bad about themselves, then church is the right place to be at this time of year. And later the man says something about not feeling welcomed, and Kevin thinks he's speaking of church, and he says, "At church?" And he says, "Oh no, everyone's welcome at church." Reminders of worship, subtly, just there in the background. The other day I was out shopping, actually a couple weeks ago, not this last week, but the week before. I was shopping, and I was at a store, not a religious store. I wasn't at Hobby Lobby, where maybe you'd hear it, or the Book and Bible House, also known as Living Well. I was in just a secular store, and there, over the speakers in the background, is Bing Crosby crooning, "Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him." And then in this secular place, who are we adoring? Christ the Lord. And he was actually crooning. It was good, not my crooning, which is a little more like crowing sometimes. But there he is singing in this background, this reminder of worship. Even the word Christmas itself, you might not know this, but it is a reminder of Christmas. To my Spanish brothers and sisters, it is not Christ Mas, it's not more Christmas. It's from the Latin, Christes Mass, which means Christ's Mass. And for those of the Catholic tradition, this is a reference to worship. Everywhere, just these background reminders that this season is related to worship. But what is worship? What is worship? It is more than sitting here at this moment, even though it's nice to be here with all of you. It is more than worship music, although I love it and it's beautiful. It's more than that. Those songs have always been a part of the Christmas story. The account of Jesus' birth is actually structured around songs, and I preached about that last year if you want to go and listen to those sermons from last year. But all the reminders of worship in culture and even in church music, even being in this space which is a reminder of worship, these are not the full acts of worship. And while they may remind us, they do not make us actually worshipers, because worship is actually an act of the heart. And the Christmas account that's found in the Bible reminds us of this with the words that are used to describe worship. And so I want to look at two words that are in the Christmas narrative of the Bible that remind us of the heart aspect, the importance of the heart aspect of worship. So turn in your Bibles to the book of Matthew chapter 2. And if you are watching on the Hope channel, I invite you to turn with us as well. And even I'd say if you're there watching us on the Hope channel and you don't have a Bible, right now you can email us at info@spencervillechurch.org and we make sure you get a Bible. Or if you're watching us on YouTube right now, if you don't have a Bible, just put a comment in the comment section and Pastor Jason will connect with you privately and he will make sure that you get a Bible, a free Bible in the near future for this. But Matthew chapter 2. In Matthew chapter 2, the Bible reads, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him.' When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.' Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, 'Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him.' After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him." They fell down and worshiped him. Now, the word that is used there to describe the worship that the wise men were doing is a word that is pronounced in the Greek, proskuneo. And I want to illustrate, I'm going to illustrate now for you what this word means, okay? Here's what this word means. This word means doing this. To lie flat on the ground with your face in the dirt. Now, some of you might be grossed out that I just put my face where feet are sometimes. But this is what that word means. They were so moved in this moment that their hearts were so impressed that they were filled with humility before a baby, before a child, that they got down on their faces like this. And this is the word that is used to describe worship here in the Christmas story. This humbling before a king, to be flat on our face before the king. Now we may say, well, this is cultural, because today we don't understand this type of bowing really before someone. We may do a little bow or a curtsy, something before someone royal. Maybe we nod in certain cultures, but to lay ourselves flat like this. But what a significant act this was in their culture, in their time set. Now, again, we might say, well, this is cultural, so that's the way that they worshiped. And these were royal individuals, so they understood what it was to be before a king. But I want you to look in the book of John. In the book of John, chapter 4, Jesus is having a conversation with a lady, and Jesus is part of the Jewish nation. She's part of the Samaritans. And so they have some different viewpoints on worship. And so Jesus is having a dialogue with this woman about worship. And she's thinking of worship as all about the space and the location in which you worship and the ancestry of your worship. That's what she's thinking about. And Jesus says to her in John chapter 4 and verse 20, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You will worship the Father. You will worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship," and the word he uses here, "must worship in spirit and in truth." The word that he uses is to lay oneself on the floor in spirit and in truth. He's talking about this condition of a heart, a condition of the heart that is so moved in you that you're willing to be humbled in the most amazing ways before God, before the King. That is what is going on here. Worship is more than putting a nativity scene in our front yard. It's more than Home Alone having a giant church in their movie. It's more than Bing Crosby crooning in the background while we're shopping. It's even more than us just showing up in this place and enjoying the festivities of this season. Worship is humbling ourselves before Jesus in spirit and in truth. So how do we do that? How do we do that? How do we get to that place? Because our natural condition, even for us that are Christians, our natural condition is not to have that humble of a spirit before God. How do we get that way? Turn your Bibles with me to James chapter 1. I just want to give you 3 quick points before I move on to our second word of some ways in which this season maybe we can practice getting into that spirit of truly humble worship before our God. In James chapter 1, the book of James chapter 1 and verse 5, the Bible reads, "If any of you lacks wisdom," Now I want to say this about this phrase, okay? It says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, none of us be tempted to say, well, I don't lack wisdom, so I'm good." All right? The Bible isn't really asking if you lack. It's kind of tongue in cheek there a little bit. The implication is that we all lack wisdom. The implication is that we all need insight from God. "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him." Here's one of the ways that we begin to get ourselves into this humble state of worship. Accept that we are not the final authority, not in other people's lives, but we are not even the final authority in our own lives. We are not the final authority in our own lives. The decisions we make, the beliefs that we have, the directions we go in life, we should seek God's authority on those things. And God will give generously to all. The second thing that we can do to begin to put our hearts into this humble state and being reminded of our humility before the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords is to confess and embrace that we are no better, but also, listen to this, that we are no worse than anyone else. In other words, live in contentment with where you are. Look at verses 9 through 11 of this passage. Let the lowly brother boast, or actually let's look at 9 and 10. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation and the rich in his humiliation. So in other words, whether you're poor or in a lowly state, or whether you have abundance, if you're in that poor and low, don't think of yourself as worse. Man, I wish I was like that person. And if you're above someone, don't think, oh man, I'm better than that person, or that person's kind of strange. No, but we're all equal before God. And when we begin to look at others and look around and see others and start to see others as equal before God, then we're again placing God in that proper position of authority. We realize that all our decisions, all our thoughts need to come from the Lord, and we're placing him in authority. And now we're looking around us and we're saying, oh wait, I'm not better than anybody else, because in the eyes of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, we're all equal at the foot of the cross. And so I begin to humble myself. And then the third thing, this season especially, in which we're getting gifts and being around those we love, many of us, we need to acknowledge where everything good in our life comes from. My wife and her Connect group this morning, I was listening in as I was getting ready, and I heard them use this verse. Every good gift, this is James 1:17, and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Everything that's good in our lives, everything in our lives that's good and praiseworthy is from God. If we spend our time thinking on these things, that God's the final authority of everything that I do, I'm no better than else, everything I have is from God, it begins to put my heart in the proper context. Rather than saying, here's what I think about this. Well, what does God think? Well, I don't think God's right. Or you know what? I'm a little better than those people, or I'm a little worse than those people. I'm not really living content. Or, I've done a lot of hard work to make sure that we have a lot of good things. Rather than thinking that way, I start to put God in all that perspective, and my heart becomes humble before the Lord. And we'll be on the road to proskuneo, to being humbled before our Lord, to be willing to sacrifice our pride before God. But there's another aspect to the heart of worship that comes from the Christmas story, and that's found in the book of Luke, chapter 1, and we're not gonna read the whole Luke narrative because it's much longer. But the dangerous thing is that position of being face down on the floor, that worship of humility. It can be misconstrued for us to think that, it's a somber, despondent position. But actually that humility comes out of what is this other word that describes worship. And it is the word agaliao. And it's the word that's used in several places in Luke chapter 1. But some places you may recognize this word is when Jesus's mother, Mary, she's pregnant with Jesus, and she goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is also pregnant at a miraculous point in her life. And Elizabeth says, when I saw you approaching, John, agaliao, in my belly, he began to worship with extreme joy. He was this, but then I saw you and it was this. And Mary sings in the Magnificat. She sings about the great joy. She says, our people were in this pain, but now there's agaliao. It's the idea that we've gone from this to now great joy. The baby was still, but now we see Jesus and there's great joy. And the idea is that we're humble before our God because he's taken us from this into this position, this wonder of great joy. The worship before the King is not a morose or despondent position. Even when we're prostrate on the floor before him, we're there because we're humbled, because he's taken us from this into this position of great joy as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I don't know quite how to describe it in fully human terms, but it's this idea of when, in a moment when everything shifts, when everything goes from, to, oh my, this this wonder. It was me just a few days after my 11th birthday, 1989, January of 1989. And the 49ers are losing the Super Bowl to the Cincinnati Bengals 13-16. And there's only a couple minutes left in the game. And the 49ers are on the 8-yard line, just minutes to go. And Joe Montana, the quarterback of the 49ers, begins to drive the ball down the field. And as he's driving down the field, I begin as a kid to get hopeful, to have a little bit of hope in my heart. But then Joe Montana throws an incomplete pass and seconds have ticked off the clock, and now we're getting closer and closer to time expiring. And then on the next play, second down, a lineman gets a 10-yard penalty, an illegal man downfield. At the time, it was a 10-yard penalty. Now it's only a 5-yard penalty. So any of you fact checkers that want to check me on this, trust me, I know my Niners Super Bowls. And now it's second down and 20, but more time has expired off the clock. There's only 60 seconds left, and we're at about midfield. And now I feel the tears beginning to well up in my eyes. Yes, I cared way too much about sports, but I feel these tears welling up in my eyes, and I'm sitting there going, oh, we're gonna lose to the Bengals. And I'm so sad about this. And 3 plays later, Joe Montana to John Taylor in the back of the end zone, and we win. From this, I mean, I just got a little bit of chills just thinking about it. I apologize. To this, from this to Hagalao. That's great joy, but see, that doesn't even fully capture it. It may be more like this. I want to be careful how I say this, but you know, weddings are a bit stressful. Have any of you noticed that? Any of you been to a wedding that's stressful? Anyone want to acknowledge it? Just raise your hand like this behind your jacket, men, if you want to do that. Weddings can be a bit stressful. My wedding day was a bit stressful. I shot a really good round of golf at the beginning of the day. That was good. But then shortly after that round of golf, I found out that I lost my vows. I realized that I had lost my vows that I had written. And when I told Christina, which might not have been the best decision, she was not too pleased with this. And the day began to get a little stressful. And other things started to happen. For instance, Christina's family is really, 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 really awesome at taking pictures. And they're really, really good about it. And my family is really, 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 really not good at taking pictures. And so my family, because they're really, really not good at taking pictures, they kind of conveniently showed up late, hoping that they'd miss the pictures. Now, not my parents or my immediate family, but my extended family. And so that caused some extra stress because we're here waiting on we had Christina's like 100 extended family members, and we were wondering where my 100 extended family members were, as we had like 7 of us, you know? So that caused some stress. And then we had our flower girl that didn't really seem to want to cooperate with anything. And so that was a little stressful. And then the church, the person who was the coordinator at the church, because churches require you to have a coordinator, you know, had forgotten to turn on the air conditioning. And we had 500 people in a church on a 107 July 13 degree day. It was a little bit warm. And I was thinking, let's just get through this day. And then the doors in the back of the church opened. Agaliao. From this to this. And as Christina walked down the aisle, there's pictures of me. I just was doing like the white man's overbite, like tears streaming down my face. Not the dance part, just the crying part. But even that may not. It's that football moment, and it's that moment. But even another. When I was with you all last week, if you were here, you'll remember that we talked about that little oops that came into Christina and mine's life, that special, wonderful surprise of our son Dayton. We weren't expecting him, or we weren't expecting the pregnancy. Once he came, we were expecting him, don't worry. But we weren't expecting it. But one morning early on in the pregnancy, Christina comes into our room and she says, I miscarried. And me, non-medical at all, said, how do you know? And she told me, she's a nurse, she's medical, she does anesthesia. For all I know, she could have put some of you to sleep, I don't know. But she says, I know. My parents were visiting, we told them. They were visiting on town on vacation. We told them, and just this whole day, we were trying to enjoy the day, but the whole day was really just this fighting back of tears and of sadness. Our doctor was kind enough to get us in quickly, and we got into the doctor's office the next day, and he began to check Christina, examine Christina. Then he went out of the room for a few minutes, and when he went out of the room, Christina and I were just sitting there in silence, despondent, sad. Doctor comes back into the room, he checks Christina again. He goes, that's what I thought. He said, do you see that little dot there? And I said, yeah. And then it began to flicker. And he said, do you see that flicker? He goes, that's your baby. Agaliao. From this to this. And the doctor experienced it too, because he was just sitting there on his stool and I literally lunged at him and hugged him and tackled him, weeping. And he was like, okay. It's all of this combined. All of these things from this into just sudden joy. That's the worship of Jesus. And yet Jesus is more than all of that. Jesus is more. Jesus is more. J.R.R. Tolkien called Christ's birth the catastrophe of human history, a good catastrophe. The world was held captive in its own sin. Hey, I was held captive in my own sin. And then suddenly there was Jesus and there was this agaliato, this extreme joy. And because of that extreme joy, I'm humbled before my King and I go, Jesus, that you would save someone like me, how could it be? How could it be? I'm humble before the Lord in worship because I'm so joyful that the Lord came into this earth to be born so that he could save me and he could save you. That is the heart of worship this Christmas season. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, hit the like button here. Subscribe to our page for future videos, or for the next video, click the box right here.